This happened to me about 4 years ago when I was 21. It was Easter, broad daylight, maybe around 11 a.m. I'm in the fashion district of my big city, which is relatively safe during daytime. I'd never had any actual run-ins with crazy, even though I would see homeless people and unwell people all the time talking to themselves. I'm normally pretty good at keeping my head down and sensing danger before it happens, or so I thought. Anyways, looking for a store with shoes, I pass a homeless woman who's either on drugs or unwell, possibly even both. I make a note of her, but ignore her because it's broad daylight, and it's Easter, and there's lots of people around. She's sitting on the edge of the sidewalk yelling to herself. I go into my store a couple blocks down, finish up there, pass her again to go to another store, and then when I go to pass her a third time, that was the last straw for her. She decides that she knows me from somewhere. I see her get up and start to yell at me. "Fuck you, bitch. Stupid fucking bitch. You thought I wouldn't know it was you, bitch?" She then charged me. It all happened so fast. I thought I was having a leisurely stroll on Easter, so I didn't have my car keys out yet, or my pepper spray. I start to run to my car, and she's behind me. I'm kind of against my car and turn around. She's right there. I size her up, and she's very dirty and has sores, and I think to myself that I definitely don't want to fight her. Not that I can't fight anyways, but I figure now is the best time to learn. She goes to sucker punch me in the back of the neck as I duck and run around, and she barely misses me. This all happened within 10 seconds. Nobody is helping, by the way, despite it being a busy street and me screaming. I am lucky enough to accidentally run into the last store I had been in. If it had been another store that didn't know me, I think they would have kicked me out for causing a scene. I live in a big city and have had issues like this before, where shopkeepers won't help because they don't want drama. You know, the drama I had nothing to do with. I run in crying and telling him about the lady. The lady runs in after me, and I hide behind the counter with him, telling him I need to get to my car, and she won't let me, and she tried to hit me, etc. He must have known her from the neighborhood, and he held her back from me as I got in my car and drove off safely. The whole time she was still screaming and trying to get around him to me. I made it to my family's Easter thing safe, but avoided that part of the city for a couple of years. I've always wanted to go back and thank that man. I don't know what would have happened if he wasn't there, or how I would have gotten into my car. This past Easter, my dad, a pilot for a cargo shipping company, was in town and offered to take me across the inlet for a nice dinner. As his co-pilots were away from their families, they were also invited to join, and gladly did. While I waited for them to validate their tickets in the ferry terminal, I spotted an unlikely duo standing by the door. Two guys, late 20s at most, one large and oofish, the other shorter and a movie star gorgeous. I looked just in time to see Oof nod in my direction, and MS make a face that can only be described as, meh, I'd fuck her after a few beers. They stood close to us in the terminal. Keep in mind this ferry carries hundreds of people at a time, and I told my dad about the nod. He laughed and continued talking to his co-pilots next to us. Every time I looked over, MS was already looking at me. I shook my head. We sat on opposite ends of the ferry, Oaf and MS deep barking before us. I was glad they were gone. We walked up the street from the terminal to the restaurant, and when I turned back to take in the view of the city across the water, I was surprised to find the duo had somehow ended up behind us, and were slowly walking up the street. I didn't think too much of it. It was a busy area, and lots of pubs were around. I did think about it more when they walked by the restaurant, peering intently into the front window, where we were standing waiting for a table. They smiled, exchanged words with each other, and kept moving. I let out a sigh of relief until they walked back from the opposite direction. They stopped. They leaned on a bike rack in front of the restaurant for a few minutes and then left. MS stared over his shoulder the whole time. Over dinner, I informed my dad and his co-pilots of the events that transpired without them even realizing. They laughed about it, and eventually had me laughing about it too. We'd never see the pair of guys again. 3 hours later, as we waited for the return ferry, I was talking to our company, recounting a story from earlier at dinner, when I spotted Oof and MS over my dad's shoulder. MS was looking my way. Scratch that. Staring. I quickly informed the guys. They were shocked and kept looking back at the pair. There was a miniature showdown in the ferry terminal as each party stared each other down from opposite ends. I ended up getting a 3-man escort home that night. I remember when I was a kid, sometime before the age of 8, on an Easter morning. I was just waking up and my sister and I were laying in my mother's bed, and I saw a tall, skinny, bald, hunched figure walking across my bedroom. I remember it was light gray or white, and kind of resembled a human or a skinwalker. The only demon I can find that resembles it even a little bit would be the Dover demon. I remember seeing it one other time during the day, walking across my yard while I was staring out of my screen door from the couch as a kid. I thought it could have been my dad since he was tall and skinny, but when I looked over, he was on the opposite side of where the demon walked. I was just wondering if anyone else had an experience similar to this, or am I just imagining things? First and foremost, while I am not a Christian myself, I do hold a healthy level of spirituality, and I am quite honestly okay with any faith practice out there, provided that it is also healthy and does not overstep its boundaries. People are people and have the right to do as they please, but attacking someone using your faith as a weapon, that is something that I do not do. I live in a rental house with 2 friends in a pretty decent neighborhood. We're in very close proximity to the neighbors, which is a fair portion of the reason that this is a problem. We've met them before in passing many times, but never had an actual conversation with them. So I picked up yoga when I was in college as a means of relaxation and getting my mind right. It's something that I do daily, once in the morning and sometimes in the evening. One of my friends also practices yoga, and we usually do it together on outside patio that's attached to our house. So the neighbors I'm referring to are a family of 4, husband, wife, college-age daughter, and teenage son. I won't mention any names out of respect for privacy, and the obvious that nobody will actually care about their names. We were practicing yoga one morning, around 7 a.m., and the wife comes out and walks over to our fence. She seemed kind of cheerful, but she turned smug really fast when she said, "Do you really have to be doing that?" We tried to briefly converse with her from afar, but when we couldn't get the reasoning, we went over to her. She said that we were doing wasn't right, and that she didn't want her children exposed to that. We asked her what we were doing that was so wrong, and she pointed out that yoga was a form of meditation that isn't Christian, and that they raised their family to believe in God. This woman also pointed out what we were wearing, which was yoga pants and a tank top. She went as far as to point at my chest and say that during our yoga sessions, a lot of the moves and poses we did put those on display, and it was something that she didn't want her children seeing. So the Lord that she pays to worship hath bestowed upon me the D cup, so no matter what I wear, they're going to be at least somewhat displayed. Lady, I can't help that. Both myself, as well as my chiropractor, wish that this wasn't as big of an issue as it is, but it is, so we'll have to live with it. I just smiled and said that I'd be happy to cover up a little bit more during our morning yoga sessions. This wasn't enough, because she said that under no circumstances was it something that we should have been doing in the first place. Eventually she went back inside and went about our day. It was 2 days later before we heard from them again. We were doing yoga outside, as we have been doing since we moved in, and we get another visit. I even went as far as putting a hoodie on, just to show a level of responsibility. This time, she came with her daughter, and we got yet another earful about doing yoga. It was like she was on a mission to save our souls, rambling about manifesting energy, paying tribute to a Hindu god, and tampering with the metaphysical world. My friend had enough and told them to please stop harassing us, because we do yoga for about half an hour in the morning and in the evening, and that's it. We go on with our lives. She then pointed out that when they pray, that we're not doing anything different than what we were doing. The two of them became very offended and then pouted off inside their house. The final straw came when the husband, or the patriarch of the family, knocked on our door and handed us a pamphlet that, I swear, literally highlighted the dangers of yoga and the human soul. It looked like something you could find at the front of a church. It labeled a number of things wrong with it, and also listed few things you could do to get right with God. For fuck's sakes, it's yoga. I fail to see how this is offensive. We're not trying to hurt or offend anybody. Our other roommate, who was the only guy in the house, went later that day and returned the pamphlet to them, and said that if he heard from any of them again, that we would be pressing harassment charges on them. Thankfully, we haven't heard from them since. We still practice yoga outside. It's our property. We have that right. As much as I'd love for there to just be peace, at some point you have to put your foot down and acknowledge that it's ridiculous. If any spiritual person found anything I said to be offensive, I do wholeheartedly apologize. I'm not condemning all Christians, just the toxic ones.